Today we're making piadina. We are not making the traditional piadina romagnola, which would call for lard and sometimes a little leavening agent. But this is my easier version of piadina that you can make at home very simply, very easily. Without any really advanced notice, you can make a bread within 10 minutes, not even, of work, and then just let it rest about a half an hour, and you're ready to roll it out and cook it on the stovetop. You're going to notice that this is actually very similar to Mexican tortilla. And they do share a lot. Both of the original versions actually use lard. So I'm going to skip on the lard, and I'm going to be using extra virgin olive oil instead in my version. So in my bowl, at this moment, I have some all-purpose flour. I have 190 grams of all-purpose flour. And to that, I'm going to add 45 grams of whole wheat flour. You can decide to do this with only all-purpose, or you can do this all whole wheat. You can play around with different kinds of flour mixes that you like. I like what the flavor of the whole wheat brings in. It's just got a nice nutty flavor to it. So I'm just mixing that. I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to weigh out my salt. I think that weighing salt is just a lot more precise than doing it by the teaspoon. So we're going to put in about 4 grams of salt. So this has quite a bit of flavor in and of itself. It's got a really nice, almost like a grill taste from being cooked on the stovetop. And the whole wheat and the olive oil really bring in a whole other dimension. So we're going to mix that up. And then I'm going to add to this 40 grams of extra virgin olive oil. And again, if you want to go real traditional, you would use lard. I'm very happy with olive oil. I think it tastes delicious. It won't give you quite as flaky of a piadina, but that's okay. So we add the olive oil, and then we just mix it up. Now, you could do this in a food processor, but that just, to me, seems like a waste of time, having to clean different parts of the machine and getting some bits stuck here and there. A bowl and a spoon is really all you need. So when this kind of looks, you can see there's like pea-sized clumps of fat throughout the flour. We're ready to add the water. And we're going to weigh the water. And I know a lot of times people prefer to use, measuring cups. But I think you're a whole lot better off measuring everything by weight. It's going to be consistent from time to time. So we're going to put in 120 grams of water. And then if this is a little bit on the soft side, we'll add a little bit more of the all-purpose flour. If it's a little bit dry, add a little bit more water. But it's important that you allow 30 minutes for the dough to hydrate, so that mostly what's going to happen, which really makes your job easier, is that the gluten is going to relax. And when the gluten relaxes, it makes rolling out thinly much easier. So let's just mix that up. Again, all we have in the bowl is our flour, our salt, some olive oil, and now water. So this is really a super easy dough to make. If you want to add baking powder, you certainly can. I find that it makes it a little bit just more floppy, and I'm happy with the texture of it, a little bit more tight and resilient. Okay, so now this dough is actually perfect. You can see it's cleaning the sides of the bowl, it's cleaning the bottom. Nothing is really stuck. I'm going to put this on the counter, and I'm going to knead it for just a few minutes. So you're not looking to develop a tremendous amount of strength in the dough, but you want it to be something that holds together well. So let's just knead this. And again, if this sticks, you put a little bit of flour. But let me show you how you know that you need to work the dough a little bit and that this doesn't have strength and doesn't have the gluten formed yet. When I take it, it just shreds. See that? I haven't developed the gluten yet because I haven't kneaded it or let it rest. So essentially, it just tears into pieces. It won't hold together when you pull. So when you knead, you're going to develop that gluten and you're going to develop the strength. So we want to develop the gluten in the dough so that the dough will be able to stretch without shredding or tearing. And we do that by kneading. Now you can knead with one hand, you can knead with two hands. You can pretty much knead however you're comfortable. You really want to get this to become very smooth and very homogeneous, very elastic, And that's super important if you're going to be able to roll it out nice and thin later. So we need to let it rest in between the kneading that we're doing now and then the rolling out later. What I always like to do is after I've kneaded it, I like to cut it into the pieces that I'm going to knead later. In other words, I don't let it rest as a whole ball. I portion it out, I pre-shape it as a round, and then I let it rest in that shape. And what that does is it allows you to roll it out more easily later without it stretching back quite as much. So let's take a look at this now. You can see that now when I pull, it holds. It doesn't shred that same way. Okay? So look at this. I can pull it. It's definitely allowing me to stretch it without it breaking. So just like another maybe 30 seconds of kneading is really all this needs. Okay, I'm happy with my dough. It looks beautiful. If you take a look at it, I mean, it's smooth. So I'm going to weigh my dough. I'm thinking I'm going to do probably about 6 pieces, but we'll see what this weighs. Even more, I'm going to do 8. I like to do 50-gram pieces. So this is 400 grams of dough. And I'm just going to cut this up and then weigh it. And then I'll just adjust if one is a little bit too little. So our dough has been cut into 8 pieces, and each piece weighs 50 grams. So what I'd like to do now is just shape this into balls and let the balls rest under the inverted container for about 30 minutes. So you can just roll the dough ball along on the table, whatever works for you. The other way is, of course, you can do it in your hands. I find that this is better. It develops more tension. So you really just want to cup the piece of dough and roll it along on the table. Put a little bit of downward pressure with your thumb and your index. And this way it kind of makes the dough nice and round. If there's a seam side, try to put it flat side down with the seam side down. So just cover this up and let it rest for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to roll this out. Our dough balls have rested for about 30 minutes, so now they should be good and relaxed. I'm going to uncover them. And we want to keep them covered as we roll out one. So in other words, only uncover one at a time. You don't want them to form a skin. And then just a little bit of flour down on the surface of the table, not too much, light dusting. And pat that ball down into a flat disc and put a little bit of flour on each side. And then we're going to roll. Want to get this nice and thin. It really doesn't need to be a perfect round, okay? So don't stress if it becomes a little bit, funny shaped. Maybe one side is a little more square, a little bit more oval. It really doesn't matter. Just keep rolling it and get it nice and thin. And it helps if there's that little bit of coating of flour on the table. What really is important here is keeping it to the same thickness. You don't want it to become too thick on one, spot and then too thin on another. So just keep your eyes on it, look at it, and make sure that it's even. Once in a while, if it seems to be prying loose from the table, give it a flip, and that's going to help it to roll out thinner. So I'm pretty happy with this. My 50-gram piece rolled out to about, I want to say this is about 6 inches, but I certainly don't want to say something and have it be wrong, so why don't we look at it? 6.5. Okay, so we have a 6.5-inch circle, and I'm going to stack it right here, and I'm just going to keep on rolling out my dough the exact same way. While you're rolling it, cover it with a towel so that it doesn't get dried out. So make sure that you stack your rolled out discs under a towel. You want to cover them, keep them covered with a towel, and don't put them directly one on top of the other. You don't want them to stick together. They're only going to be in there for a couple of minutes before we actually go to cook them, but you don't want them to stick together. So if you think they're going to stick, put a little bit of flour in between each of the piadine, and this way you're sure they're not going to stick together. We've made all the dough discs. We've rolled them out beautifully. They've been resting here simply until I finish rolling all of them out. They don't need to rest once they've been rolled out. They are ready to cook. So you want to keep the rest of them covered with a towel or some kind of plastic wrap while you cook the rest. Take one over to the stove. Let's get our skillet nice and hot. I've been preheating this for a couple of minutes. So in it goes. It's going to take about maybe 30, 40 seconds per side. So you want this fairly hot, but not so smoking that it's going to burn our piadina. So we just want to get it to a good place. So about 30 seconds or so. And they're going to puff a little bit. You're going to see that they're going to puff. Look at that beautiful pocket forming. You'll notice that there was no oil added to the pan at all. I didn't brush these with any kind of oil or fat. There's enough oil in the dough to give it plenty of flavor. Look at that bubble forming. It's crazy. There's an air pocket happening right here. I think it's fascinating to watch these cook. Such simple ingredients, not at all a difficult technique, and you end up with something so fabulous so quickly. It's incredible. So we're going to take this guy out, and we want to have a towel ready to wrap up our piadine when they come out. This way they stay nice and supple, nice and moist. It's very impressive when this happens. And then they deflate, which is normal. The air sits right back down. So our piadine are ready. I've been keeping them nice and warm and soft inside this towel, and they are ready to eat. So you can essentially fill them with anything that you like. They keep at room temperature, wrapped up in the towel for a couple of days, no problem. You don't want to refrigerate them. If you refrigerate them, they get hard. Now you could freeze them if you want to. Just remember, these are delicious, nice and warm. So if you want to heat them up, pop them into an oven for about 5 minutes. Maybe wrap them in some tin foil first if you're reheating them. Don't go so long that they get crispy. They need to be nice and soft. Hope you enjoyed making this with me, and I'll see you again soon.